What if I told you that on what seemed like an ordinary night, inside a familiar rink, the Toronto Maple Leafs didn't just win a game, they might have changed the entire tone of their season? What if I told you that the puck fired by Mitch Marner in overtime wasn't just a goal, but the quiet turning point that could separate yet another year of frustration from a potential historic redemption? Because sometimes the difference between glory and heartbreak doesn't make the headlines. It hides in the details. And on that night, the details were all there, drawn across the ice. The clash between the Leafs and the Canadiens carried an invisible weight on its own. On one side, Toronto, stacking victories and trying, game after game, to solidify the image of a team finally ready to break free from its own scars. On the other, Montreal, living through the drama and desperation of a team fighting not to watch its season slip away. The result? A tense duel, meticulously contested across every inch of the rink. A game that, even ending 1-0, spoke far more about the soul of these two teams than any blowout ever could. For a long 60 minutes, the Toronto Maple Leafs were the undisputed owners of the game. The team dictated the pace, controlled the action, and turned their offense into a precision clock, forcing the opponent into pure survival mode. The Montreal Canadiens, on the other hand, seemed to have only one mission: resist. And resist they did, with every muscle, with every spectacular save by Jakob Dobes and every desperate block. But in the end, there was no escape. As the clock ticked closer to send the game into the dramatic fate of a shootout, Mitch Marner appeared. He received a pass from William Nylander, had space, had time, and turned patience into precision, placing the puck into the left corner of the net like someone signing the final page of a meticulously written script. For the numbers, it was just another win. But for those who carry the weight of blue and white on their chest, it was a reminder. This team might finally have learned how to win the games they used to let slip away. And if you're the kind of fan who lives every minute, who feels every victory as relief and every defeat as a wound, you're in the right place. Because here on this channel, every play becomes history. Every rumor gets investigated. Every piece of news is broken down, as if it were a key piece of the puzzle this franchise has been trying to solve since its last title back in 1967. So go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button, and tell me, did you also feel like that Marner goal was more than just a goal? But the story of that night didn't end there. Not in the embrace between Marner and Nylander. Not in Sheldon Keefe's restrained smile, nor in the frustration written on the Canadiens players' faces. The real plot twist, the one few noticed at that very moment, was unfolding a few hundred miles away. In Washington, the Columbus Blue Jackets were writing their own story. A story that, ironically, was starting to pile pressure right onto the path Toronto could face in the playoffs. While the NHL slept under the shadow of the Leafs' narrow victory, the Columbus Blue Jackets turned Capital One Arena into the stage of a massacre. A 7-0 win over the Capitals not only kept their faint playoff hopes alive, but also shook the wild card picture, and as a result, began altering potential opponents for Toronto in the postseason. Led by Adam Fantilli, the Blue Jackets played like a team refusing to be written off before its time. The Capitals, already qualified and resting stars like Ovechkin, seemed absent, and Columbus seized every single mistake to pile on goals and hope. It was one of those nights when the final score isn't just a number. It's a sign that the battle is still wide open, that the improbable still breathes. The impact of that game echoed in two directions. For Montreal, the pressure tripled. For Toronto, a silent alarm went off, because in the NHL's chessboard, the pieces shift position every single round. If the Habs stumble and Columbus manages the unlikely surge they need, the entire playoff puzzle could be rearranged. And with it, the Leafs' first-round opponent. But far from the spotlight, the real transformation seems to be happening inside Toronto's own locker room. What we saw on the ice that night was the portrait of a mindset the team has spent years trying to build. Discipline, patience, and composure. Three words not often associated with the Leafs' DNA, but which now seem deeply rooted. Sheldon Keefe, long questioned for his decisions in critical moments, seems to have finally found the right chemistry. It's no coincidence that a team once known for overwhelming opponents with sheer talent now knows how to play on mistakes, manage possession, and stay emotionally intact until the perfect moment to strike. And the reflection of that is clear. When the game got tough, When Montreal clung to the tie as if holding on to their last breath, Toronto didn't break. They didn't force plays. They didn't panic. They simply waited, like a team that knows the opportunity will come sooner or later. And it did. In Nylander's pass, in Marner's shot, in the roar of a crowd that has spent years dreaming of this kind of maturity. But the past has taught Leafs fans anything. It's that danger often hides behind euphoria. Because now, the script can flip at any moment. If Columbus keeps climbing and steals a wild card spot from Montreal, the playoff bracket could push Toronto into facing an entirely different opponent. One capable of rewriting the ending of a season that once felt under control. On the other hand, if the Leafs maintain this cold, calculated standard, and if the confidence Marner showed when picking his corner in overtime is truly a reflection of a new collective identity, maybe this is finally the season we'll see Toronto break the cycle. Time will give us the answers. But until then, every game is a clue. Every piece of news a fragment of something bigger, being built piece by piece behind the scenes, in carefully worded interviews, in silent decisions only understood when it's already too late. And now I want to know, have Maple Leafs truly learned from the mistakes of the past? And are they finally ready to turn all this composure into a real run toward the Stanley Cup? Or are we simply witnessing another chapter in a story that seems destined to repeat the same ending? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any breakdowns. What if I told you that behind every close victory, behind every decisive goal, there's a storyline that began long before the puck ever hit the back of the net? Because in the NHL, the biggest plays don't always happen on the ice. More often than not, they unfold in quiet offices, in closed-door meetings, and in phone calls that can alter the fate of an entire franchise. And in the case of the Toronto Maple Leafs, this story began long before Mitch Marner sealed the night against the Montreal Canadiens with that cold, calculated shot. The truth is, that victory over Montreal, that absolute control the Leafs displayed, wasn't built overnight. It was a direct result of a silent strategy, crafted by someone who, ironically, is no longer even part of the club, Kyle Dubas. Even before the 2023 trade deadline, Dubas knew the team needed more than just offensive firepower. It needed structure, resilience, players who understood the way of defending a crest when everything else seemed to be falling apart. And that's exactly what he sought when he gave up precious draft picks to bring in names like Ryan O'Reilly, Noel Acciari, Luke Shen, Eric Gustafsson, Sam Lafferty, and of course, Jake McCabe. That was the invisible foundation that supported Toronto's relentless performance in that game against the Canadiens. Because while the world was busy talking about Marner, Nylander, and Matthews, the true backbone was anchored in the defense. And it's impossible not to mention Jake McCabe as one of the main reasons for that defensive solidity. The trade that brought McCabe from Chicago seemed at the time like a high-risk gamble. After all, it's not every day that a franchise gives up first and second round picks, especially knowing those picks could turn into the future of the organization. But Dubas understood that to build a real shot at a championship, you have to think about the now. McCabe arrived in Toronto carrying not just his defensive talent, but also the experience and composure the Leafs had long been missing. A defenseman who knows the art of blocking shots, winning board battles, stabilizing an entire defensive zone, and above all, play with a reduced AAV thanks to the deal Chicago accepted, retaining half his salary. On paper, it looked like the perfect fit. And when McCabe signed a 5-year contract extension worth over $22 million, the message was clear. This wasn't a rental player. He was a foundational piece. And if today Toronto is capable of suffocating opponents, maintaining mental control in long, exhausting games, it's because players like him are there. When the team dominated the Montreal Canadiens for 60 straight minutes, holding them to just 2 shots in the first period, it wasn't luck. It was McCabe and company doing what they do best, protecting every inch of the ice as if every play could cost them the entire season. But this story goes beyond talent. It's also about the price of choices. Because every trade comes at a cost, and the Toronto Maple Leafs paid dearly. First-round picks are, in the NHL, golden tickets to the future. And in less than 2 trade windows, the team gave up not only its 2025 pick, in the deal that sent Anderson and Gogolev to Chicago, but also the 2026 pick, shipped to the Boston Bruins in exchange for Brandon Carlo, and the 2027 pick, sent to the Flyers for Scott Lawton. It's a massive investment, but one that only makes sense if the return is immediate. And so far, McCabe has delivered exactly that. Since his arrival, McCabe has been more than just a reliable defenseman. His numbers speak for themselves. 56 points in 160 games, an average of nearly 21 minutes on the ice per game, over 300 block shots, 378 hits, and a level of commitment that doesn't fade, not even in the playoffs. On the night Toronto beat Montreal, he was once again an invisible fortress, the kind of player that rarely makes headlines, but without whom victories simply don't happen. And this is where both stories intersect. While Columbus and Montreal wage their own battle for the wild card, while Toronto fights to stay atop the Atlantic Division and the world focuses on goals and points, the real success might actually be taking shape within the locker room walls, in the fine print of transactions, and in Sheldon Keefe's ability to finally have the right pieces at his disposal for the most decisive moments. Because the NHL is a long game, but time is often the enemy of those who wait. And Toronto, after decades of frustration, seems to have learned that lesson. So now the question remains, how far is it worth going to sacrifice the future for present? Will this aggressive all-in trade mentality finally bring the Stanley Cup back home? Or are the Leafs writing yet another story of high-stakes bets and bitter endings? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have handled these trades differently? And if you enjoyed this deep dive behind the scenes, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because in the next video, we'll explore how these traded picks could shape the team's future and whether the price paid for McCabe and company was truly the beginning of a new era or just another desperate roll of the dice.